Hey guys, tonight we are sailing out into the Atlantic, towards a sun-drenched volcanic archipelago shrouded in ancient mystery. Imagine yourself on a small, sturdy vessel, the salty spray kissing your face as a chain of rugged, often mist-topped islands rises from the deep blue ocean. These are the Canary Islands, a place known to ancient mariners as the Fortunate Isles, and for centuries they were home to a unique and enigmatic people known as the Guanches. We're here to explore one of their most fascinating and enduring legacies, their carefully prepared mummies, silent forms that seem to whisper tales from a world largely lost to time, particularly concerning their beliefs about the soul's journey after life. Now, if you were an early European adventurer landing on these shores in, say, the 14th or 15th century, and you stumbled into a sacred Guanche burial cave filled with these silent, preserved figures without understanding their significance, well, let's just say your attempts to collect souvenirs might have been met with some rather forceful and entirely justified local disapproval. Respect for the dead was, and is, a serious business. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And please, do let me know in the comments where you're listening from this evening, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always a quiet thrill to see how far these nocturnal narratives travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your imaginary boat anchors in a quiet cove, perhaps on the island of Tenerife, dominated by the majestic, often snow-capped peak of Mount Teide, or maybe on Gran Canaria, with its dramatic ravines and cave systems. These islands, born of volcanic fire, possess a stark, raw beauty: black sand beaches, rugged lava fields, lush laurel forests in some areas, and an abundance of natural caves that would become crucial to the Guanche way of life and death. The precise antiquity of Guanche settlement in the Canary Islands and the exact nature of their earliest interactions with other maritime cultures remain subjects of ongoing archaeological research and sometimes spirited debate. However, it's widely accepted that they were the indigenous inhabitants encountered by Europeans when they began to explore and colonize the islands from the 14th century onwards. Who were these Guanche people? A mainstream historical fact, confirmed by linguistic analysis, archaeology, and more recently, genetic studies, is that the Guanches were of Berber origin, their ancestors having migrated from North Africa at some point in antiquity, perhaps as early as the first millennium BCE or even earlier. For centuries, they lived in relative isolation on these islands, developing unique cultures adapted to the specific environment of each island in the archipelago. They were a Stone Age people at the time of European contact, meaning they had no knowledge of metallurgy. Their tools and weapons crafted from stone, bone, and wood. They lived by herding goats and sheep. Some limited agriculture: barley, wheat, beans, fishing, and gathering wild plants. But it is their treatment of the dead, their remarkable practice of mummification, that has most captured the imagination and forms the heart of our exploration tonight. Scattered across the islands, in remote, often inaccessible caves, within hidden lava tubes, or on secluded mountain ledges, these silent forms have been discovered, carefully prepared human remains, preserved for centuries by a combination of deliberate embalming techniques and the dry, stable cave environments. These aren't the lavishly bandaged, sarcophagus-encased mummies of ancient Egypt, with their golden masks and intricate hieroglyphs. Guanche mummification was a different tradition, unique to these Atlantic islands, yet no less fascinating, and certainly no less indicative of a profound concern for the fate of the soul. These mummies are the whispering heart of our story, because the Guanche language is now extinct, though some words and place names survive. And much of their original culture and belief system was tragically lost or irrevocably altered during and after the brutal Spanish conquest, which concluded by the end of the 15th century. We have accounts from early European chroniclers, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, who encountered the Guanches, and while these are invaluable, they are often filtered through the lens of colonial bias, religious prejudice, or simple misunderstanding. The mummies themselves, therefore, along with the archaeological context of their burials, offer some of our most direct, if still enigmatic, clues into the Guanche worldview, especially their beliefs about death, the afterlife, and the preparation of the soul for its journey. A quirky tidbit about the Canary Islands is their very name. It doesn't come from the little yellow songbirds, as you might expect. Pliny the Elder, the Roman writer, recorded that the islands were named Canaria, Isle of Dogs, because of the large dogs' canes found there by an expedition sent by King Juba II of Mauritania around 40 BCE. Whether these were wild dogs or domesticated ones kept by the Guanches is debated, but it's a curious etymological twist for these fortunate isles. Perhaps the Guanches has also had a special place for dogs in their spiritual beliefs, maybe even as guardians for the soul's journey. We can only speculate. So, as you step into the imagined cool, dry air of a Guanche burial cave, the outside world fading behind you, you are entering a place of profound stillness, a sanctuary for the dead. The light from your torch flickers across rough stone walls, perhaps revealing niches where these silent forms rest, often wrapped in carefully prepared layers of animal skins, goat or sheep, stitched together with animal sinew, and sometimes accompanied by meager but significant grave goods. These are not just preserved bodies. These are the ancestors of a lost people, their very existence a testament to a unique island culture and a deep spiritual concern for what lies beyond this life. The whispers we seek tonight are not necessarily audible sounds, but the silent stories these mummies tell through their careful preparation, their placement, and the enduring mystery that surrounds them. These are not just preserved bodies. These are the ancestors of a lost people, their very existence a testament to a unique island culture and a deep spiritual concern for what lies beyond this life. The whispers we seek tonight are not necessarily audible sounds, but the silent stories these mummies tell through their careful preparation, their placement, and the enduring mystery that surrounds them. But to truly hear those whispers, to understand the meaning behind these silent forms, you first need to step back from the burial caves and into the vibrant, if now largely vanished, world of the living Guanches, the people who created them. You're now exploring their unique island ways, their isolated existence across the diverse Canary archipelago, in the centuries before European conquest irrevocably changed their destiny. Imagine yourself transported to the Canary Islands not as a modern tourist, but as an observer in, say, the 13th or 14th century. You find a scattered archipelago of 7 main islands and several smaller islets, each with its own distinct character, its own microclimates, its own communities of Guanche people. Tenerife, dominated by the colossal, often snow-capped peak of Teide, which they likely held sacred. Gran Canaria, with its deep ravines and fertile valleys. Lanzarote and Fuerteventura, more arid, almost lunar in their volcanic starkness. La Gomera, La Palma, El Hierro, each a unique island world. The degree of inter-island contact and cultural homogeneity among the Guanche populations across these different islands prior to European conquest is a subject of ongoing research, with some evidence suggesting periods of more significant isolation and others pointing to shared linguistic roots and occasional, if perhaps limited, interaction. But they all shared a common Berber ancestry, their forebears having arrived from North Africa many centuries, perhaps even millennia, earlier. For a long time, these islanders lived in remarkable isolation from the wider world. After their initial settlement, the strong currents and winds of the Atlantic, coupled with what seems to have been a gradual loss of sophisticated boat building and open ocean navigation skills, if their ancestors possessed them to a greater degree, meant they had little to no contact with mainland Africa or Europe for many hundreds of years. They were a Stone Age people, in the sense that they had no knowledge of metalworking, their tools, their weapons, spears, clubs, throwing stones. Their everyday implements were crafted from the abundant volcanic stone, from bone, from shell, and from wood. It's like they were living in a kind of anachronistic bubble, preserving ancient ways while the rest of the Mediterranean and European world was undergoing dramatic technological and social changes. It makes you wonder what they thought if a random piece of Roman, or later European, shipwreck debris ever washed ashore. Look, Guayarmina, another one of those shiny, hard but useless rocks. The mainlanders have such peculiar taste in beach litter. Their society was primarily pastoral. Goats were king, providing milk, meat, and skins. Sheep were also important, and on some islands they kept a specific, rather primitive, type of pig. Agriculture was practiced, but it was often challenging in the volcanic, sometimes arid terrain. They grew barley from which they made gofio, a roasted flour that was a staple food, and still is in Canarian cuisine, wheat, beans, and figs. They gathered wild plants, fished in the rich coastal waters, and collected shellfish. Life was a constant, skillful adaptation to the unique resources and limitations of each island. It wasn't an easy existence, but it was one they had sustained for centuries. You'd find them living in various types of dwellings. Natural caves, abundant in the volcanic landscapes, were widely used, offering shelter from the sun and wind. They would often enlarge or modify these caves, creating living spaces, storage areas, and, as we'll see, sacred burial chambers. But they also built simple stone houses, sometimes semi-subterranean, or huts made from perishable materials. A mainstream historical fact is the division of some islands, like Tenerife, into several distinct kingdoms or mancheados at the time of European contact in the 15th century. Each ruled by a mensi king and a council of nobles or elders, suggesting a hierarchical social structure. There were nobles acamensi, commoners achicaxna, and possibly even a lower class or outcasts. Imagine a Guanche settlement. Perhaps it's a cluster of stone huts clinging to a hillside, or a series of cave dwellings overlooking a ravine. You see people dressed in tamarcos, cloaks or tunics made from stitched goat or sheepskins, sometimes dyed with natural pigments. They are skilled in working stone, in weaving plant fibers for ropes and nets, in crafting simple but effective pottery, often decorated with incised patterns. Their language, now lost except for a few recorded words and place names, was a Berber dialect, a direct link to their North African origins. A quirky tidbit is the unique whistling language, Silbo Gomero, from the island of La Gomera. While its fully developed form might be a later adaptation, the need for efficient long-distance communication across the island's deep, steep ravines likely fostered such ingenious methods from ancient times. Imagine texting your neighbor across a 2,000-foot gorge using nothing but complex, melodic whistles. Definitely beats a dropped call. Their daily life would be governed by the seasons, by the needs of their herds and crops, and by a deep, intimate knowledge of their island environment. They would know every plant, every animal, every pathway, every water source, and this intimate connection with their often dramatic and powerful landscape, the volcanoes, the sea, the sky, would naturally shape their spiritual beliefs, their understanding of the forces that governed their world, and, crucially, their views on what happened when life came to an end. This isolated existence, this unique cultural adaptation to a volcanic archipelago, is the world that produced the mummies we are here to explore. These weren't people in constant contact with Egyptian or Andean mummification traditions, though some very old speculative theories tried to suggest such links. Their practices of preserving the dead arose from their own specific cultural and spiritual needs, within their own unique island crucible. And as you immerse yourself in this vision of pre-conquest Guanche life, their resourcefulness, their connection to the land, their isolated world, you begin to understand that their ways of dealing with death would be just as unique, just as deeply tied to this remarkable time and place. And as you immerse yourself in this vision of pre-conquest Guanche life, their resourcefulness, their connection to the land, their isolated world, you begin to understand that their ways of dealing with death would be just as unique, just as deeply tied to this remarkable time and place. But to approach their mummies and their funerary rites with any true understanding, you first need to step into their spiritual landscape, to try and see the world through their ancient eyes. You're now exploring Guanche cosmology, meeting their gods and spirits, and feeling their profound reverence for the sacred peaks and natural forces that shaped their existence. The Guanche people, living for centuries in relative isolation on these volcanic islands, developed a rich and complex spiritual worldview, deeply attuned to their unique environment. Reconstructing a coherent pan-Guanche pantheon is challenging, as beliefs and the names of deities likely varied significantly between the different islands and even different communities, with early European accounts often providing fragmentary or biased interpretations, sometimes trying to fit Guanche beliefs into familiar classical or Christian frameworks. It's like trying to understand a vast ancient library when most of the books are lost, and the few surviving pages are translated by someone who doesn't quite grasp the original language or context. So, this Ashuhuchanak, he who sustains the sky and earth, sounds a bit like our Atlas, doesn't he? Let's just jot that down. Close enough. Despite these challenges, a picture emerges of a belief system that, like many indigenous faiths, saw the world as alive with spiritual power. There was often a belief in a supreme being, a creator, god associated with the heavens and sustenance. On Tenerife, this deity was often called Achaman, god of the sky, the supporter, the eternal. He was seen as benevolent, the source of all good things. Other islands had similar high gods with different names, like Acoran in Gran Canaria or Era Oranjan in El Hierro. These weren't necessarily gods who demanded constant, elaborate temple worship in the way of some Mediterranean deities. Their presence was felt in the vastness of the sky, the warmth of the sun, the life-giving rain. Often complementing this supreme male deity was a powerful female divinity, perhaps a kind of Earth Mother or celestial goddess. On Tenerife, Chaxiraxi was a prominent figure, often interpreted as a mother goddess associated with fertility, the moon, and protection. After the conquest, a quirky tidbit is that Chaxiraxi was readily syncretized by the Spanish with the Virgin Mary, specifically the Virgin of Candelaria, who became the patron saint of the Canary Islands. This blending of indigenous and Christian figures is a common theme in many colonized lands, a testament to the resilience of older beliefs finding new ways to survive. Beneath these high deities, the Guanche world teemed with a host of other spirits. There were spirits of nature, inhabiting specific mountains, caves, rocks, springs, and even the sea itself. These weren't necessarily gods in a grand sense, but powerful local presences, the guardians of specific places. Much like the Landvetter of Iceland we've encountered before, disrespecting these local spirits or failing to make appropriate offerings could lead to misfortune. The Guanches lived in a constant, often delicate negotiation with these unseen forces that shared their island homes. And then there were the mountains themselves, particularly the colossal volcano Teide on Tenerife. A mainstream historical fact is that Mount Teide is not just Spain's highest peak, but also one of the largest volcanoes in the world from its base on the ocean floor. For the Guanches of Tenerife, this immense, often snow-capped, fire mountain was undeniably a profoundly sacred and powerful place. It was seen as an axis mundi, a pillar connecting the earth to the heavens, perhaps the very dwelling place of Achaman. But Teide also had a darker side. Guanche mythology spoke of Guayota, a powerful, malevolent being or demon said to dwell within the volcano, responsible for its destructive eruptions, its fire and smoke. Guayota was the antithesis of the benevolent Achaman, and stories told of their cosmic struggles. It's your classic good versus evil celestial drama, but played out on a very, very large volcanic stage. Honey, Guayota's acting up again. Look at all that smoke. Did someone forget to leave him his offering of particularly grumpy goats? Caves, so abundant in these volcanic islands, also held immense spiritual significance. They were not just shelters from the elements, they were thresholds to other worlds, places of mystery, perhaps entrances to the underworld, or secluded sanctuaries for ritual and worship. And, as we know, they became the preferred resting places for the Guanche dead, their mummies carefully interred within these natural sepulchres. Did the Guanches have a dedicated priestly class? The Spanish chroniclers mention figures like the Ficanes on Gran Canaria, who seem to have been powerful religious and political advisors, perhaps responsible for maintaining sacred sites, performing rituals, and interpreting omens. On the same island, there were the Harmaguadas, groups of noble virgin women who lived in seclusion, dedicated to religious practices, perhaps tending sacred fires or performing specific rites. These figures would have been the primary intermediaries between the human community and the world of gods and spirits. Interaction with this spirit world involved prayers, offerings likely of milk, gofio, fruits, perhaps parts of sacrificed animals like goats, and specific rituals performed at sacred times or locations. The aim was always to maintain harmony, to ensure the benevolence of the good spirits, and to ward off or appease the malevolent ones. Life was a constant balancing act in a world perceived to be alive with unseen powers. So, as you stand on an imaginary Guanche island in the 10th to 15th centuries, look around you. The wind whipping off the Atlantic carries not just salt spray, but the whispers of these ancient beliefs. The towering peak of Teide is not just a mountain. It's the home of gods and demons. The rustling in the laurel forest is not just the breeze. It's the movement of nature spirits. The very earth beneath your feet is sacred, shaped by divine forces, and shared with a host of powerful, unseen beings whose favor is essential for life, and, as we will see, for a peaceful passage into the afterlife. This deep reverence for their dramatic, spirit-filled landscape is the very foundation upon which the Guanche practice of mummification and their beliefs about the soul's journey were built. This deep reverence for their dramatic, spirit-filled landscape is the very foundation upon which the Guanche practice of mummification and their beliefs about the soul's journey were built. So, having glimpsed their pantheon of gods, their understanding of local spirits, and the sacredness of their volcanic peaks, you now approach a more solemn, more intimate aspect of their worldview, their beliefs about death, the fate of the soul, and the profound importance of ensuring a proper passage into the afterlife. You're stepping, with quiet respect, through death's quiet door, as the Guanches perceived it. For the Guanche people, like for so many ancient cultures, death was not necessarily seen as an absolute, terrifying end, but rather as a significant transition, a journey from the world of the living to another state of being, another realm. The precise details of Guanche eschatology, particularly their conceptions of the soul's specific journey and the nature of the afterlife realms, are among the most challenging aspects to reconstruct, as they rely on interpreting often ambiguous burial practices and the filtered, sometimes contradictory, accounts of 15th and 16th century European chroniclers who observed the Guanches before their culture was largely assimilated or extinguished. These chroniclers, like Fray Alonso de Espinosa or Leonardo Torriani, while providing invaluable information, were viewing Guanche customs through their own Christian lens, and often didn't fully grasp or perhaps weren't even told the deeper spiritual meanings. It's like trying to understand a complex foreign film with only a very basic, and possibly slightly judgmental, subtitle track. They seem to be leaving offerings with the deceased, probably some sort of quaint, misguided pagan picnic for ghosts. How droll. Despite these limitations, a picture emerges of a people who held their dead in high regard and believed in some form of continued existence for the soul. The very act of mummification, which we will explore in detail soon, is a powerful testament to this. You don't go to the immense trouble of carefully preserving a human body unless you believe that the body itself, or the individual it once housed, holds some continuing significance after death, or that the soul needs some form of anchor or assistance for its onward journey. Where did the Guanche soul journey to accounts from early chroniclers suggest a belief in a supreme being? Ashaman, in Tenerife, for example, associated with the sky. It's plausible that the souls of the virtuous, or perhaps particularly those of high status like the menses, kings and nobles, were believed to ascend to a celestial realm, to dwell with or near this sky god in a state of bliss. The high mountain peaks, reaching up into the heavens, might have been seen as literal launching points or pathways for this spiritual ascent. Imagine the soul, released from its earthly tether, soaring upwards from the slopes of Taida towards the starry expanse. Conversely, there were also beliefs in a more malevolent deity or principle, Guayota on Tenerife, associated with Taida's volcanic depths and a kind of underworld or place of punishment for the wicked. So, a form of judgment, a weighing of one's deeds in life, likely played a part in determining the soul's ultimate destination. This wasn't necessarily a heaven and hell in the strict Christian sense, but rather different potential fates or realms based on one's actions and perhaps one's social standing, and the proper performance of funerary rites. It's the classic choose your own afterlife adventure, but your choices in life and how your relatives handled your funeral heavily influenced which page you got to turn to. The importance of a proper passage cannot be overstated. This involved several key elements. Firstly, ensuring the soul departed peacefully and completely from the body. Lingering attachments, unresolved grievances, or an improper death could lead to the soul becoming a restless, potentially malevolent, ghost, troubling the living. Secondly, protecting the soul on its journey. The afterlife was not necessarily a safe or easy place to navigate. There might be obstacles, trickster spirits, or perilous pathways. The rituals performed by the living and the way the body was prepared and interred were all designed to aid and protect the soul during this critical transition. Thirdly, ensuring the deceased found their rightful place in the spirit world, so they could become benevolent ancestral spirits rather than tormented wanderers. This brings us to the strong likelihood of ancestor veneration among the Guanches. While details are again somewhat speculative due to the loss of so much of their oral tradition, the careful preservation of bodies, especially those of high status, and their placement in ancestral burial caves, strongly suggests that the dead, particularly important ancestors, continued to hold a significant place in the lives of their descendants. They weren't just gone, they were transformed, perhaps becoming intermediaries with the gods or guardians of the lineage and the land. Their whispers, their influence, could still be felt. A mainstream historical fact is that ancestor veneration is a common feature of many Berber cultures in North Africa, the ancestral homeland of the Guanches, making it highly probable that similar beliefs were carried to and developed within the Canary Islands. A quirky tidbit mentioned by some early chroniclers is the Guanche practice of lamentation and specific mourning customs. There might be ritual wailing, fasting, or the avoidance of certain activities by the bereaved for a period. Some accounts even speak of professional female mourners. These outward expressions of grief were not just about personal sorrow. They were also part of the ritual process of honoring the dead and helping their spirit on its way. The state of the body itself seems to have been considered important. Mummification wasn't just about staving off decay, it was about preserving a recognizable form, perhaps as a fitting vessel for some aspect of the soul, or as an object of continued reverence. If your ancestors are going to be powerful intercessors for you, you probably want them to be, well, presentable in their spiritual digs, not just a pile of dust. Yes, great-grandfather Guayarmina is still very influential with the rain spirits. We keep him nicely preserved in the good cave, with all his favorite pottery, and a fresh goatskin wrap every spring. So, as you stand at the threshold of a Guanche burial cave in your mind, you understand that this is not just a tomb, it's a gateway, a carefully prepared launching point for the soul's next great adventure. The Guanche view of death was infused with a deep sense of respect, a recognition of its transformative power, and a profound belief in the need for meticulous ritual care to ensure that the quiet door of death opened onto a path of peace and continued spiritual significance, rather than one of peril or oblivion. The Guanche view of death was infused with a deep sense of respect, a recognition of its transformative power, and a profound belief in the need for meticulous ritual care to ensure that the quiet door of death opened onto a path of peace and continued spiritual significance, rather than one of peril or oblivion. And at the very heart of this meticulous care, this profound preparation for the afterlife, lay the remarkable and unique Guanche practice of mummification. You are now stepping into the shadowy, perhaps somewhat pungent, world of the Merlados, the skilled Guanche embalmers, witnessing their sacred, often secret, art of crafting enduring forms for the departed, preserving the physical vessel for reasons deeply intertwined with the soul's eternal journey. Forget the elaborate, linen-wrapped mummies of Egypt with their gilded sarcophagi and intricate hieroglyphic spells. Guanche mummification, while equally fascinating and indicative of a sophisticated understanding of preservation, had its own distinct character, perfectly adapted to the materials and environment of the Canary Islands. This wasn't just a crude attempt to dry out a body, it was a skilled craft, a ritualized process performed by specialists who possessed a unique and highly valued, if perhaps somewhat feared, body of knowledge. These embalmers, referred to by some early chroniclers by terms that translate to something like those who prepare the dead or the preservers, were the unsung artisans of the afterlife. It's like they were the ultimate bespoke tailors, but instead of fitting you for a new suit, they were fitting your earthly remains for eternity, ensuring you looked your best for your debut in the spirit world. Does this goatskin wrap make my aura look fat? Do you think the precise range and consistency of Guanche mummification techniques across the different islands and social strata, and whether there was a single standard method or more localized variations, remains an area of active research, with mummy studies often revealing new details. However, from the accounts of early European observers and the scientific examination of surviving mummies, often called Zaxos on Tenerife, a general picture of their meticulous art emerges. The process likely began soon after death. The body would be taken to a secluded place, perhaps a specific cave or a specially designated area away from the main settlement, as contact with the dead was often surrounded by taboos and purification requirements. Here, the mirlados, who might have been a distinct social class or individuals from certain families tasked with this sacred yet polluting duty, would begin their work. It's possible that men embalmed male bodies and women embalmed female bodies, a common practice in many cultures to maintain propriety. For some individuals, particularly those of high status like menses, kings, or nobles, the process might involve evisceration. The internal organs, which decompose rapidly, would be carefully removed through an incision. What happened to these organs is not always clear. They might have been treated separately and placed back in the body, or perhaps interred in special containers, or even disposed of in a ritually prescribed manner. This internal cleansing was a crucial first step in ensuring long-term preservation. The body would then be thoroughly washed and cleansed, perhaps with salt water from the powerful Atlantic that surrounded their islands, or with infusions of specific local herbs known for their purifying or preservative properties. Then came the critical stage of drying or desiccation. The Canary Islands, with their generally dry, sunny climate and porous volcanic caves, provided an excellent natural environment for this. The body might be laid out in the sun for a period, or perhaps slowly dried over a smoky fire, the smoke itself having a preservative effect. Some accounts suggest the use of absorbent mineral earths or specific types of sand to help draw out moisture. Once sufficiently dried, the body would be anointed and treated with a variety of preservative substances. A mainstream historical fact, confirmed by analysis of Guanche mummies, is the use of various plant resins, animal fats, and other natural materials in the embalming process. You can imagine the mirlados applying a mixture of herbs, perhaps crushed aromatic plants like laurel or pine, mixed with goat fat or butter, and possibly specific mineral powders. One particularly intriguing substance mentioned in some chronicles is dragon's blood, not literal dragon's blood. Sadly, that would make for a very different bedtime history episode. But the dark red resin of the native Canary Island dragon tree, Dracæna draco, a plant that itself has an ancient, almost mythical aura, and whose resin was known for its astringent and preservative qualities. It's like an ancient, all-natural, super-strength body lotion, but with the primary goal of stopping you from, well, rejoining the general ecosystem too quickly. If the body had been eviscerated, the empty cavities might then be stuffed with aromatic and absorbent materials, more herbs, dried moss, perhaps a special type of tree bark or fine sand, all to help maintain the body's form and further aid preservation. The final and visually most distinctive stage was the wrapping. The preserved body would be carefully and tightly enveloped in numerous layers of animal skins, usually those of goats or sheep, which were abundant. These skins would be expertly prepared, perhaps softened and tanned, and then meticulously stitched together around the body using needles made of bone or fish bone and thread made from animal sinew or plant fibers. The number of layers often indicated the status of the deceased. A powerful mensi might be wrapped in as many as 15 or 20 skins, creating a bulky, well-protected funerary bundle. Sometimes, finely woven mats made from plant fibers were used as an outer wrapping. This careful encasement created an enduring form, a protected vessel for whatever aspect of the deceased was believed to persist or journey onwards. It was the ultimate bespoke sleeping bag, designed for a very, very long rest. A quirky tidbit is that the Mirlados themselves were often socially ostracized, living apart from the community due to their constant contact with the dead, which was considered a source of ritual impurity or dangerous spiritual power. Yet, their skills were utterly essential for the proper transition of souls, according to Guanche beliefs. They were the necessary outsiders, the masters of a taboo yet vital art. The entire process, from initial preparation to final wrapping, could take many days, even weeks, for the most elaborate mummifications, and would undoubtedly have been accompanied by specific chants, prayers, and rituals performed by the Mirlados themselves, to protect them from the spiritual dangers of their work and to ensure the efficacy of the preservation for the deceased soul. This wasn't just a technical procedure, it was a sacred craft, a final act of service, ensuring that the body, that precious container of life, was made as enduring as possible, a silent, waiting form, ready for its journey into the mysteries of the Guanche afterlife. This wasn't just a technical procedure, it was a sacred craft, a final act of service, ensuring that the body, that precious container of life, was made as enduring as possible, a silent, waiting form ready for its journey into the mysteries of the Guanche afterlife. And once the Mirlados' meticulous art was complete, once the deceased was transformed into one of these enduring, skin-wrapped forms, where did they go? What was their final resting place? You are now venturing into the cool, silent darkness of Guanche burial caves, or perhaps scaling treacherous volcanic ledges in your imagination, to explore these remarkable cave sanctuaries where the mummies were laid in their high, often inaccessible, repose. The Canary Islands, born of ancient volcanic fury, are riddled with natural caves, lava tubes, and deep, sheltered ravines for the Guanche people who lived so intimately with this dramatic geology. These subterranean spaces were not just empty holes in the ground, they were potent, often sacred locations. Caves provided shelter for the living, yes, but they also served as profound thresholds to other realms, perhaps entrances to the underworld, the domain of chthonic spirits, or simply places where the veil between the physical and spiritual worlds was exceptionally thin. It's no surprise, then, that caves became the preferred sepulchres for their carefully prepared dead. It's like choosing the VIP lounge of the geological world for your eternal rest, complete with natural air conditioning and a very exclusive, very quiet guest list. The precise criteria by which the Guanches selected specific caves for funerary purposes, whether based on geological features like dryness and inaccessibility, perceived spiritual resonance, proximity to ancestral settlements, or even astronomical alignments, is not fully understood and likely involved a combination of practical and sacred considerations. But what is clear is that these weren't just any old caves. They were often difficult to reach, situated high up on cliff faces, deep within winding lava tubes, or in remote, mountainous areas. This inaccessibility served several purposes. Firstly, it offered protection for the deceased. Wild animals would find it harder to disturb the burials. Human interference, whether from rival groups or, in later times, from those who might not understand or respect Guanche customs, was also minimized. It's a bit like putting your most precious valuables in a very high-security, naturally occurring vault. Good luck trying to desecrate Great Uncle Tenosaur's mummy. He's in Cave 7B, up that rather alarming cliff face. Just past the really angry-looking eagle's nest. Bring climbing gear, and possibly a very large offering of apology fish. Secondly, these high remote locations often possessed a profound sense of sanctity and separation. By placing their dead in these lofty, almost ethereal spots, the Guanches may have been symbolically bringing them closer to the sky realm, the domain of the supreme god Achaman, or facilitating the soul's upward journey. The very act of carrying a heavy, mummified body up a treacherous mountain path or along a narrow cliff ledge to such a burial cave would have been an arduous, dangerous undertaking. A final act of devotion and respect by the living for their departed kin. This wasn't a casual, let's just pop him in this handy hole affair. This was a serious, committed funeral expedition. Imagine yourself entering one of these Guanche burial caves. The air is cool, still, and incredibly dry, conditions that, along with the mummification process itself, contributed to the remarkable preservation of the remains, a mainstream historical fact. Confirmed by numerous archaeological discoveries across the archipelago, is that these caves often served as collective tombs, necropolises used by families or clans over many generations. So, you wouldn't just find one mummy, you might find dozens, even hundreds in some of the larger cave systems, carefully arranged. How were they placed? The mummies, those Zaxos wrapped in their layers of goat skin, were often laid out on raised stone biers or wooden platforms, though wood rarely survives, or placed in natural niches in the cave walls. Sometimes they were found in a seated or flexed position, other times extended. The care taken in their arrangement suggests a desire to maintain their dignity, to ensure their peaceful repose. It was a silent, ordered community of the dead, resting in the cool darkness, waiting. The atmosphere within such a cave sanctuary would be one of profound stillness and ancient reverence. The only sounds might be the drip of water seeping through volcanic rock, the distant sigh of wind at the cave mouth, or the soft rustle of your own movements. The light from your imaginary torch would cast long, dancing shadows, illuminating row upon row of these silent, skin-wrapped forms. It's a scene that would inspire not just fear, but a deep sense of awe, a direct confrontation with the continuity of generations and the enduring human concern for the fate of the dead. A quirky tidbit is that some of these burial caves are incredibly difficult to access even today, requiring specialized climbing equipment. This has helped to protect some sites from looting and disturbance over the centuries. But it also makes archaeological investigation a significant challenge. It really makes you appreciate the determination of the ancient Guanches to ensure their dead rested in these high, secluded, and very well defended by nature, at least locations. They weren't just burying their dead, they were enshrining them. These were not just burial places, they were true sanctuaries. The act of placing the mummies in these high, often sacred locations was the culmination of the long and meticulous process of soul preparation. It was the final step in ensuring the deceased was properly transitioned, their physical form preserved and protected, their spirit free to embark on its journey, or perhaps to remain as a revered ancestral presence, watching over their descendants from their lofty, silent abode. The caves themselves, imbued with the sanctity of the dead and the natural power of the volcanic landscape, became an integral part of the Guanche spiritual map. Places where the whispers of the ancestors were believed to be strongest, where the veil to the other world was at its thinnest. The caves themselves, imbued with the sanctity of the dead and the natural power of the volcanic landscape, became an integral part of the Guanche spiritual map. Places where the whispers of the ancestors were believed to be strongest, where the veil to the other world was at its thinnest. And as you peer into the quiet gloom of these ancestral resting places, your attention is drawn not just to the carefully wrapped mummies themselves, but also to the items sometimes placed beside them, the grave goods, those poignant offerings and personal belongings that hint at what the living believed their departed kin might need or desire in the mysterious realms of the afterlife. Unlike some ancient cultures that famously packed for eternity as if embarking on an extended, very luxurious, interdimensional vacation, yes, Ancient Egypt, we're looking at you and your solid gold chariots. Guanche grave goods were generally more modest, more utilitarian, reflecting perhaps their Stone Age material culture, their island environment, and a different emphasis in their eschatological beliefs. You won't find vast hoards of glittering treasure here. Instead, you find items that speak of daily life, of personal identity, and of a practical, if still deeply spiritual, concern for the well-being of the deceased. It's less Pharaoh's bling, and more essential travel kit for the recently disembodied. Don't forget your favorite goatskin pouch, Great Uncle Akemo. You might need it to carry, well, whatever it is one carries in the great beyond, ethereal snacks. Perhaps the most commonly found items in Guanche burials are pottery vessels. These are often simple, handmade clay pots, bowls, and jars, sometimes undecorated, sometimes with incised geometric patterns characteristic of Guanche ceramic traditions. What was their purpose? The most straightforward interpretation is that they contained offerings of food and drink, sustenance for the soul on its journey or in its new existence. Imagine a small jar filled with gofio, that roasted barley or wheat flour staple we mentioned, or perhaps milk, water, or a fermented beverage. Even if the soul was believed to be non-corporeal, the essence of these offerings might have been thought to nourish or sustain it. Or perhaps these vessels were symbolic, representing the continued provision and care of the living for their departed. A mainstream historical fact, based on archaeological analysis of residues in some of these pots, is that they did indeed sometimes contain organic remains consistent with food or liquid offerings. Lending strong support to this interpretation, it's a near-universal human gesture. This desire to ensure our loved ones don't go hungry, even in the afterlife. Alongside pottery, you might find the deceased's personal ornaments. These could include necklaces made of shell beads, polished stones, or animal teeth, simple pendants carved from wood or bone, or perhaps armbands or anklets. These items weren't necessarily of great material value in our modern sense, but they would have held immense personal significance, markers of the individual's identity, their status, or perhaps even amulets worn for protection or luck in life, now intended to serve the same purpose in the next world. Imagine a favorite string of carefully drilled fish vertebrae, or a smooth, water-worn pebble that had always been a comfort, now accompanying its owner on their final journey. Tools and implements that were important to the person in life are also sometimes found. A skilled craftsman might be buried with his stone adze or bone awl, a warrior with his wooden spear, though actual weapons are not overwhelmingly common in all Guanche graves, suggesting perhaps a less martial focus in their afterlife preparations compared to some other cultures, or that weapons were passed on to living heirs. These items could be seen as practical tools for a new existence, or as symbols of the individual's role and skills, ensuring their identity was maintained. Here lies Tinerfe the Great. He was a dab hand at carving goat-milking stools. Here's his favorite chisel. May the afterlife have many, many uncarved stools. The precise symbolic significance of many Guanche grave goods, and whether they were intended as practical provisions for the deceased, status markers, votive offerings to underworld deities, or simply tokens of affection from the living, often remains open to interpretation in the absence of explicit Guanche explanations. It was likely a combination of all these things. A quirky tidbit is the occasional discovery of very small, almost miniature, versions of everyday objects in graves, particularly those of children. This could suggest a belief that the soul in the afterlife might need appropriately sized items, or it could simply be a poignant expression of tenderness, providing tiny toys or familiar comforts for a child's spirit. The mummified body itself was, of course, wrapped in layers of animal skins, usually goat or sheep, and these too can be seen as a form of grave good, providing warmth, protection, and a final, respectful covering. The quality and number of skins might also have indicated the status of the deceased. What's often notable is what is absent, or at least less prominent compared to some other ancient funerary traditions. There's a general lack of overtly religious idols or complex divine iconography placed directly with the ordinary dead, though, as we'll see, their burial caves themselves might be in or near sacred natural sites. This might suggest that their connection to the divine in the afterlife was perhaps seen as more direct, or mediated in other ways, rather than through tangible representations of gods. The overall impression is one of practical care, of providing for the essential needs of the departed, sustenance, some familiar personal items, the enduring protection of their preserved form. It's less about showcasing wealth or power for a judging panel of gods, and more about ensuring the deceased is well equipped and respectfully sent off on their journey to whatever realm awaited them. These humble grave goods, found nestled beside the silent, skin-wrapped mummies in the cool darkness of Canarian caves, are poignant whispers of affection, of belief in continuity, and of a people's profound engagement with the great mystery of what lies beyond death's quiet door. They are the last, loving provisions packed for a journey into the unknown. They are the last, loving provisions packed for a journey into the unknown. But what if that journey wasn't entirely a one-way trip into oblivion or a distant, disconnected paradise? What if those carefully preserved mummies, resting in their silent cave sanctuaries, were more than just cherished remains or souls needing sustenance for their voyage? What if they were still considered active, influential members of the community, capable of whispering guidance, bestowing blessings, or even expressing displeasure from beyond the veil? You're now delving into the intriguing possibility that Guanche mummification was deeply intertwined with a system of ancestor veneration, where the preserved dead continued to play a vital role in the lives of their descendants. Ancestor veneration, a mainstream historical fact, is one of the oldest and most widespread forms of religious practice found across the globe, from ancient China and Rome to many indigenous cultures in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. At its heart is the belief that the spirits of the dead, particularly one's forebears, retain a connection to the world of the living and can influence it for good or ill. They are not just memories. They are active spiritual forces. Given the Guanche's North African Berber origins, where ancestor veneration has deep roots, and the immense care they took in preserving their dead, it's highly plausible, indeed probable, that their mummies were central to such beliefs. It wasn't just about sending them off well prepared, it was about keeping them, in some essential way, still present, still accessible. Don't worry, Great Aunt Tamanante isn't gone, she's just a very well-preserved, slightly dusty spiritual advisor now, and she still doesn't approve of your life choices. By the way, the extent to which Guanche mummification practices were primarily aimed at individual soul preservation for an afterlife journey versus serving a more communal function of ancestor veneration and maintaining lineage identity is a key question that archaeologists and anthropologists continue to explore through the limited available evidence. Likely, it was a combination of both. The soul needed to make its journey. Yes, but the enduring physical form, the mummy, might have served as an anchor, a focal point, for the ancestors' continued spiritual presence and influence among the living. Imagine those burial caves, those often inaccessible, sacred repositories of the dead. They weren't just tombs to be sealed and forgotten. They could have been shrines, places where living descendants would go, perhaps at specific times of the year or in moments of crisis, to communicate with their ancestors. They might bring offerings, not just for the soul's journey anymore, but for the ongoing sustenance or appeasement of the ancestral spirit itself. Milk, gofio, fruits, perhaps the smoke of sacred herbs, all presented with reverence, accompanied by prayers and petitions. You wouldn't exactly be having a casual chat with Mummy Uncle Chaxaraxi about the latest goat herding techniques, but you might be seeking his wisdom, his blessing for a new venture, or his intervention in a communal problem. How might these ancestors whisper their guidance? This is where the role of dreams, omens, and specialist diviners or spirit mediums, feycanes, or other ritual practitioners would come in. An individual might sleep in or near a sacred burial cave, hoping to receive a dream message from a powerful ancestor. The appearance or behavior of certain animals near a burial site, or unusual natural phenomena, could be interpreted as signs from the ancestral spirits, and a feycan, or a similar figure, might enter a trance state to try and directly communicate with these revered Vadzimu, to borrow a term from their Shona counterparts we met in a previous journey, though the Guanche term would be different, but the concept similar. Their voices perhaps believed to speak through the medium. The mummies themselves, these enduring physical forms, would lend a powerful sense of reality and immediacy to such interactions. It's one thing to pray to an abstract spirit. It's another to address your prayers to the carefully preserved form of your great-grandfather, resting in his ancestral cave. It makes the connection feel more tangible, more direct. The whispers might not be audible sounds emanating from the mummies themselves, though folklore rarely lets such a good, spooky opportunity pass by, but rather intuitive insights, prophetic dreams, or pronouncements from a medium, all believed to be inspired or guided by the ancestral spirit whose earthly vessel was so carefully preserved. A quirky tidbit from some cultures with strong ancestor veneration is the belief that specific ancestors might have particular domains of influence. One ancestor might be good for ensuring fertility of the herds, another for success in fishing, another for healing. It's possible the Guanches had similar ideas, with different mummified ancestors, perhaps those of kings or great warriors or wise women, being appealed to for specific kinds of help. Need to find a good spot to plant your barley this year. Better go consult great-grandmother Guayarmina's mummy. Her spiritual farming advice is legendary. Just don't ask her about modern investment strategies. The preservation of royal mummies, which we'll touch on more, would be especially significant in this context. The Mensi, the king, was not just a political leader but often a spiritual one too, a key intermediary with the most powerful tribal or island ancestors, and perhaps with the high gods. Preserving his body with exceptional care would ensure his continued powerful presence as an ancestral guardian for the entire community, his spirit offering protection, wisdom, and legitimacy to his successors. So, these silent forms, wrapped in their layers of goatskin, resting in the cool darkness of their cave sanctuaries, were potentially far from passive. They were the revered elders of the lineage, the guardians of tradition, the conduits to the spirit world. Their mummification wasn't just an act of remembrance, it was an act of ensuring their continued participation in the life of the community. The whispers from these mummies were the whispers of experience, of lineage, of the enduring bond between the living and the dead, a vital source of guidance, identity, and spiritual strength for the Guanche people as they navigated their isolated island world. The whispers from these mummies were the whispers of experience, of lineage, of the enduring bond between the living and the dead, a vital source of guidance, identity, and spiritual strength for the Guanche people as they navigated their isolated island world. And if the mummies of ordinary folk were treated with such care and held such potential for ancestral connection, you can only imagine the level of reverence and meticulous preparation afforded to their leaders, the menses, or kings, and the nobility. You're now approaching the most sacred of burial caves, learning of the often more elaborate mummification and distinct funerary rites reserved for these royal spirits, individuals preserved in what passed for splendor in their Stone Age society, their enduring forms believed to be crucial for the well-being of the entire kingdom. In Guanche society, as in many traditional cultures, the king or chieftain was not just a political or military leader. He was often a spiritual figurehead, a vital link between his people, their most powerful ancestors, and the divine realm of gods like Ashaman. His health, his wisdom, his mana or spiritual power were all seen as directly impacting the prosperity and safety of his Mencheyato, or kingdom. When such a figure died, it wasn't just a personal loss, it was a communal crisis, a moment when the spiritual fabric of society could be vulnerable. Therefore, ensuring his proper passage into the afterlife and his continued benevolent influence as a preeminent ancestral spirit was of paramount importance. This called for funerary rites, and particularly mummification, of the highest order. It's like the difference between a standard funeral and a state funeral for a beloved monarch. The underlying respect might be there for all, but the scale and elaboration for royalty are on another level. Yes, everyone gets a nice goatskin wrap, but the Mency gets the deluxe, 20-skin, extra herbs and resins package with the premium cave view. The early Spanish chroniclers, who observed Guanche customs before they entirely vanished, provide us with tantalizing, if sometimes contradictory or embellished, accounts of these royal mummifications. They speak of the bodies of mencies and high nobles being treated with even greater care and more complex techniques by the mirlados, those specialized embalmers. This might have involved more thorough evisceration, the use of rarer or more potent preservative substances, perhaps specific saps, mineral or imported resins, if any trade existed for such things, and an even longer period of drying and preparation, a mainstream historical fact, often repeated by these chroniclers like Espinosa or Abreu Galindo, is that royal Guanche mummies were frequently wrapped in an exceptionally large number of painstakingly prepared animal skins, sometimes as many as 15 or 20 layers of fine, soft goat skins, often dyed with natural pigments like red ochre or specific plant extracts. These multiple layers would not only provide superior physical protection for the body, but also visually signify the immense status and sacredness of the individual within. Imagine the sheer labor involved in preparing so many skins to such a high standard, and then meticulously stitching them around the royal remains. It was an act of profound communal devotion. The exact differences in mummification techniques and funerary treatment between Guanche elites and commoners, and the degree to which these differences reflected strictly enforced social hierarchies versus simply access to more resources or specialized embalmers, are still being investigated by archaeologists through careful analysis of surviving mummies and burial contexts. But the general consensus from historical accounts is that the elite received more elaborate treatment. Their final resting places were also often distinct. While commoners might be interred in communal family caves, the mummies of mencies and paramount nobles were frequently placed in the most inaccessible, most sacred, and most carefully guarded burial caves, often high on mountain ledges or deep within complex lava tube systems. These were not just tombs. They were royal necropolises, sacred treasuries of ancestral power. The effort required to transport a heavy, multi-layered royal mummy to such a location would itself have been a significant ritual act. And what of the grave goods accompanying these royal mummies, while still generally modest by, say, ancient Egyptian pharaonic standards, no solid gold death masks here? They were likely to be of finer quality or greater quantity than those of ordinary folk. Perhaps the Mency was buried with his finest Tamarco goatskin cloak, his ceremonial staff or club symbols of his authority, an abundance of pottery vessels filled with choice offerings, or particularly beautiful shell necklaces and other personal adornments. Some accounts mention them being placed in a seated position on a raised stone or wooden bier, a posture of continued authority even in death. It's like ensuring the king still has his throne, even in the afterlife, so he can continue to hold court for the ancestral spirits. Make sure His Majesty's afterlife throne is comfortable, and maybe leave out a few ethereal goat cheese canapes for his spectral council meetings. A quirky tidbit from some chronicles describes how, upon the death of a Mummy on Tenerife, his body might be carried in a solemn procession around the boundaries of his kingdom before being taken to its final resting place, a ritual to perhaps reaffirm his spiritual dominion over the land even in death, or to allow his spirit to bid farewell to his territory. Such a practice, if true, underscores the deep connection between the ruler, the land, and the ancestral realm. The purpose of this elaborate royal mummification was multifaceted. It was an act of profound respect and honor for a revered leader. It aimed to ensure his soul's safe and auspicious journey to the afterlife, where he could take his place among the most powerful ancestral spirits. And crucially, it was about maintaining his benevolent influence for the continued well-being of his people. A well-preserved, well-honored royal ancestor was a powerful intercessor with the gods, a guardian of his lineage, and a source of legitimacy and spiritual strength for his successor and the entire kingdom. His enduring physical form, resting in its sacred cave, was a tangible link to that power, a constant reminder of the dynasty's sacred roots and its ongoing connection to the divine and ancestral protectors of the land. The whispers from these royal mummies were hoped to be whispers of guidance, prosperity, and protection for all their people. A well-preserved, well-honored royal ancestor was a powerful intercessor with the gods, a guardian of his lineage, and a source of legitimacy and spiritual strength for his successor and the entire kingdom. His enduring physical form, resting in its sacred cave, was a tangible link to that power, a constant reminder of the dynasty's sacred roots and its ongoing connection to the divine and ancestral protectors of the land. The whispers from these royal mummies were hoped to be whispers of guidance, prosperity, and protection for all their people. And this idea of protection, of the dead actively safeguarding the living and their territories, takes us a step further in understanding the profound significance of Guanche mummies. You are now considering these silent, skin-wrapped forms not just as revered ancestors or souls on a journey, but as potent spiritual guardians, silent protectors of their lineage, their land, and their most sacred sites. Imagine that Guanche burial cave, high on a cliff face or deep within a volcanic tube. It's more than just a tomb, it's an ancestral stronghold, a repository of spiritual power. The mummies within, especially those of respected elders, brave warriors, or powerful menses, were not seen as merely inert remains. Their spiritual essence, their mana, their connection to the land and the lineage, was believed to persist, anchored in some way to their carefully preserved physical forms. And this persistent spiritual presence was thought to exert a protective influence over their living descendants and their traditional territories. It's like having an invisible, very ancient, and highly dedicated security team whose main qualification is being, well, extremely dead, but also spiritually potent. Don't worry about intruders, kids. Great-Grandpa Gueton is on guard duty in Cave Alpha. His mummified glare alone is enough to scare off a shipload of pirates, or at least make them feel vaguely uncomfortable. This concept of ancestral spirits acting as guardians is incredibly widespread. A mainstream historical fact is that in countless cultures around the world, from ancient Rome with its lair's household guardian spirits, often ancestral to many African, Asian, and indigenous American traditions, Ancestors are invoked for protection. Their tombs or relics seen as sources of communal strength and spiritual defense. The Guanches, with their strong emphasis on lineage and their meticulous preservation of the dead, likely shared a similar understanding. How might this protection have been envisioned for their lineage? The ancestral mummies, resting in their sacred caves, could be seen as watching over the fortunes of their descendants. They might ward off illness, protect children, ensure fertility within the family or clan, and guard against malevolent magic or curses sent by enemies. If a family fell on hard times, they might make offerings at their ancestral burial cave, appealing to these silent protectors for aid and intervention. For the land itself, the pays, the presence of these ancestral mummies within its sacred geography could have been seen as a powerful spiritual claim, a way of anchoring the lineage's right to that territory and invoking the protection of its oldest, most deeply connected guardians. Caves containing the mummies of founding ancestors or powerful kings might have been viewed as spiritual heartlands, radiating a protective aura over the surrounding lands, ensuring the fertility of the soil, the abundance of game, and the safety of the community from natural disasters or hostile outsiders. The very mountains and ravines that housed these ancestral remains became imbued with their protective power. It's like the original "This land is our land" declaration, but instead of a song, you have a series of strategically placed, very well-preserved ancestors. And what about sacred sites? The burial caves themselves were, of course, profoundly sacred, and the mummies within were their ultimate guardians. Any attempt to desecrate such a site, to disturb the dead, would be met not just with the anger of the living, but also, it was believed, with the wrath of the ancestral spirits themselves. But other sacred natural sites, perhaps specific mountain peaks, springs, or groves, if the Guanches had such designated groves, might also have been considered under the protection of ancestral mummies interred nearby, their spiritual influence extending to guard these ritually important locations. Whether the Guanches had a clearly defined belief in their mummified dead acting as active, aggressive protectors against physical enemies in a battlefield sense, or if their protective role was understood more in terms of spiritual guardianship and ensuring the general well-being and fertility of their lineage and land, is difficult to determine precisely from the available sources. It was likely more the latter, a subtle, pervasive spiritual influence, rather than ghostly warriors rising from their caves, though that would make for a fantastic, if historically dubious, movie. How would this protection manifest? Perhaps through dreams or visions sent to the living, warning of impending danger or offering guidance, or through unexplained bad luck, or strange accidents befalling anyone who trespassed on sacred burial grounds or showed disrespect to the ancestors. There might be a palpable sense of presence or watchfulness felt by those who approached these sites with ill intent, a chilling sensation that they were not alone and were being scrutinized by unseen, ancient eyes. A quirky tidbit from some accounts of early European encounters with Guanche burial caves is the sheer terror these sites sometimes inspired in the conquistadors or settlers, not just because of the mummies themselves, but because of the perceived spiritual power and dangerousness of these locations, often attributed by them to demonic influences from their Christian perspective, but which, from a Guanche viewpoint, might have been the very real presence of protective ancestral spirits. It's like a supernatural keep out sign, highly effective against those not properly attuned to the local spiritual protocols. So, these silent, skin-wrapped forms, carefully placed in their high, remote sanctuaries, were not just passive relics of the past. In the Guanche worldview, they were active spiritual participants in the ongoing life of their people. They were the silent protectors, their enduring presence a source of strength, identity, and spiritual security. Their mummified bodies were the anchors for their watchful spirits, forever guarding their lineage, their sacred land, and the traditions they had passed down. Their whispers ensuring that the living never forgot the profound, protective power of those who had gone before. Their mummified bodies were the anchors for their watchful spirits, forever guarding their lineage, their sacred land, and the traditions they had passed down. Their whispers ensuring that the living never forgot the profound, protective power of those who had gone before. For centuries, this intricate system of belief, ritual, and ancestral connection flourished in the relative isolation of the Canary Islands, but the vast Atlantic that had long been their shield eventually became a highway for a new and far more disruptive force. You now find yourself witnessing a tragic turning point, a clash of worlds, as European ships appear on the horizon, bringing with them conquest, a new religion, and a devastating fate for both the living Guanche culture and their sacred whispering mummies. The 14th and, more intensely, the 15th centuries marked the beginning of sustained European engagement with the Canary Islands. Initially, it might have been sporadic visits by Genoese, Catalan, or Portuguese mariners seeking slaves, orchula lichen used for dyeing, or simply exploring these fortunate isles that had long existed on the edge of European maps and legends. But soon, more organized, state-sponsored expeditions, primarily from the kingdoms of Castile and Portugal, set their sights on conquest and colonization. A mainstream historical fact is that the conquest of the Canary Islands was a protracted and often brutal affair. Spanning much of the 15th century, from Jean de Betancourt's Norman Castilian expedition in 1402 to the final subjugation of Tenerife in 1496, these islands, with their strategic location on the sea routes to Africa and the burgeoning New World, were too valuable a prize for European powers to ignore. It was like finding a conveniently located, if rather fiercely defended, gas station on the empty highway of the Atlantic. Everyone wanted a piece of it. For the Guanche people, this was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. Imagine their perspective after centuries of developing their unique culture in relative isolation. Suddenly, these strange, pale-skinned men arrive in great wooden birds that sail upon the water, armed with terrifying weapons of shining metal steel swords, crossbows, early firearms that can kill from a distance, clad in armor that deflects their stone and wooden implements, and often accompanied by horses and war dogs, creatures unknown in the Canaries. It must have seemed like an invasion from another world, or perhaps the arrival of particularly ill-tempered, heavily armed deities with very bad intentions. Honey, those floating islands with the white wings are back, and they seem to be disgorging angry metalmen again. I have a bad feeling about this quarter's goat tribute. The Guanches, on all the islands, resisted fiercely. They were skilled warriors in their own terrain, using their knowledge of the rugged volcanic landscapes, their agility, and their traditional weapons to defend their homes and their freedom. There are many accounts in the Spanish chronicles of their bravery, their defiance, their preference for death over submission. But ultimately, their Stone Age technology was no match for European iron gunpowder and organized military tactics. And even more devastating than European weapons were European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, to which the isolated Guanche population had absolutely no immunity. These invisible invaders swept through the islands, decimating communities often far more effectively than any army could. The extent to which conscious, systematic destruction of Guanche sacred sites and mummies occurred as a deliberate policy of cultural erasure by the conquistadors versus more opportunistic looting or religiously motivated but uncoordinated desecration is a painful aspect of Canarian history that scholars continue to examine, but the impact was undeniably devastating. As the Spanish conquest progressed and Christianity was imposed, The old Guanche religion was suppressed. Sacred sites were often violated or reconsecrated. The Facanes and other religious leaders were persecuted, and the mummies, those revered ancestral forms, faced a new and terrible set of dangers. Imagine a Guanche burial cave, that sacred sanctuary we explored earlier, suddenly discovered by conquistadors or zealous friars. To the Guanches, it was a place of profound reverence, the resting place of their ancestors. To the conquerors, it was often seen very differently at best, a collection of pagan curiosities, at worst, a den of demonic idolatry that needed to be cleansed. Many mummies were likely destroyed out of religious fervor, seen as objects of heathen worship that had to be eradicated to make way for the true faith. Others might have been dragged out of their caves and burned along with other sacred Guanche objects. It's like finding someone else's family album and deciding it's offensive because the hairstyles are out of date, and then setting it on fire. But on a soul-destroying, culture-erasing scale, some mummies were undoubtedly looted, while Guanche grave goods were generally modest. Any perceived valuables, perhaps fine skins, unusual ornaments, or just the mummies themselves as exotic trophies, might have been taken. This marked the beginning of the Guanche mummies' journey into European collections, as objects of scientific curiosity, or sometimes just macabre entertainment. Their sacred repose was shattered, their role as ancestral guardians within their own cultural context brutally terminated. A quirky tidbit from this tragic period is the occasional account of Guanches themselves, in a desperate last act of defiance or despair, choosing to seal off sacred burial caves or even cast themselves from cliffs with their mummified ancestors rather than see them fall into the hands of the conquerors and be desecrated. Such stories, whether entirely factual or legendary embellishments, speak to the profound sanctity these preserved remains held for their people. The conquest effectively shattered the Guanche world. Their language faded, their social structures collapsed, their ancient religion was driven underground or syncretized with Catholicism, and the mummies, once central to their understanding of life, death, and ancestral continuity, became lost relics, their whispers silenced, their purpose largely forgotten by the new dominant culture. The silent forms that once connected their people to the gods and the land now lay vulnerable, their sacred meaning stripped away, their fate in the hands of those who rarely understood, and often failed to respect, the deep spiritual world from which they came. This clash of worlds was not just a military defeat for the Guanches, it was a profound spiritual and cultural apocalypse, and their mummies became its most poignant, silent casualties. This clash of worlds was not just a military defeat for the Guanches, it was a profound spiritual and cultural apocalypse, and their mummies became its most poignant, silent casualties. For a long period after the dust of conquest settled in the Canary Islands by the end of the 15th century, many of the sacred Guanche burial caves, those hidden sanctuaries holding their carefully preserved ancestors, likely slipped from the active memory of the new colonial society, or were known only through lingering local superstitions and fearful whispers among the remaining indigenous population and the new settlers. The Guanche voices were largely lost, their traditions suppressed, but their mummified forms, remarkably resilient, waited silently in the darkness. You're now fast-forwarding a century or two into the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, witnessing how these ancient islanders were rediscovered, their mummies brought forth once more into the light, often by curious European explorers, antiquarians, and nascent scientists, but frequently misunderstood and still viewed through a distorting colonial lens. As European maritime power and scientific curiosity expanded, the Canary Islands, no longer a mysterious frontier, but a Spanish possession, and a vital stopping point on Atlantic voyages, began to attract renewed attention. Early modern travelers, naturalists, and antiquarians, fueled by the Enlightenment's thirst for knowledge and the Romantic era's fascination with the past and the exotic, started to take a more systematic, if still often biased, interest in the island's unique history and archaeology. And the Guanche mummies, with their remarkable state of preservation and their air of ancient mystery, were prime candidates for this new wave of discovery. It's like your long-forgotten, very eccentric great-aunt suddenly becomes the subject of a trendy new documentary series. Surprising, a bit unsettling. And everyone suddenly wants to know her secrets. Imagine yourself as one of these early modern explorers, perhaps a naturalist like Georges Glass in the mid-18th century, or later, figures such as Sabin Berthelot or René Verneau in the 19th century, who documented Canarian natural history and antiquities. You hear tales from local islanders about caves of the ancients filled with pagan kings. Guided by a reluctant local who probably thinks you're either mad or about to bring down some ancient curse upon everyone, you make a perilous climb up a volcanic cliff face or squeeze through a narrow lava tube. And there, in the cool, dry darkness, your flickering lantern illuminates them rows of leather-wrapped forms, the silent Guanche mummies, their faces often serene, their bodies remarkably intact after centuries of repose. It would have been an electrifying, awe-inspiring, and perhaps deeply unsettling encounter, but this rediscovery was often fraught with misunderstanding. The interpretation of Guanche mummification during the 17th to 19th centuries was heavily influenced by prevailing European theories of cultural evolution and diffusion, often leading to debates about whether their preservation techniques were independently developed or derived from supposed contact with other ancient high cultures like Egypt. The idea that an isolated Stone Age people like the Guanches could have independently developed such sophisticated mummification practices was, for some, difficult to accept, echoing those earlier colonial tendencies to deny indigenous ingenuity that we saw with Great Zimbabwe. Mummies. You say, in the Atlantic, clearly. Some lost Egyptian sailors must have taken a very, very wrong turn at Gibraltar and taught them. It's the only logical explanation, apart from, the Guanches figuring it out themselves. The spiritual significance of the mummies, their role in ancestor veneration, their connection to the sacred landscape, these deeper meanings were often lost on these early observers, or reinterpreted through a European Christian framework. The mummies were frequently seen primarily as objects of scientific curiosity. How were they preserved? Or as macabre relics of a primitive pagan past, or even just as valuable collectibles. This period saw the unfortunate removal of many Guanche mummies and associated grave goods from their original burial caves. Some were excavated with little regard for archaeological context, their resting places disturbed, their stories further fragmented. They were crated up and shipped off to private collections, cabinets of curiosities, and the burgeoning ethnographic or anthropological museums of Europe. A mainstream historical fact is that many major European museums today still hold Guanche mummies acquired during this era. While this undoubtedly preserved some of them from further decay or local destruction, it also divorced them from their sacred landscapes, their ancestral communities, and much of their original cultural meaning, transforming them from revered ancestors into scientific specimens or exotic exhibits. A quirky tidbit from this era is the sometimes sensationalized public display of Guanche mummies in Europe. They might be featured in popular lectures on primitive peoples or exhibited alongside other exotic artifacts, their profound spiritual significance often reduced to a mere spectacle for the curious public. Imagine the indignity for an ancient Guanche king, once revered as a divine intermediary, now propped up in a dusty display case between a shrunken head and a collection of native spear points. Not exactly the dignified afterlife he might have envisioned. However, amidst this often clumsy and culturally insensitive rediscovery, the seeds of more systematic scientific study were also being sown. Early anthropologists and archaeologists began to measure the skulls, analyze the wrappings, and compare Guanche mummification techniques with those of other cultures. While their interpretations were still often shaped by the biases of their time, they were, at least, beginning to ask more methodical questions, to document what they found, and to recognize the unique value of these ancient human remains. The lost voices of the Guanches, silenced by conquest and cultural assimilation, couldn't speak directly to these new observers, but their preserved forms, these mummies found in their silent cave sanctuaries, began to offer their own mute testimony. They spoke of a sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and preservation, of a deep respect for the dead, and of a complex spiritual worldview that sought to bridge the gap between life and whatever lay beyond. The rediscovery was often flawed, often disrespectful by modern standards, but it ensured that the Guanche mummies, these silent forms from a lost world, were not entirely forgotten, their whispers waiting for a time when they might be heard with greater understanding and deeper respect. The rediscovery was often flawed, often disrespectful by modern standards, but it ensured that the Guanche mummies, these silent forms from a lost world, were not entirely forgotten, their whispers waiting for a time when they might be heard with greater understanding and deeper respect. And that time, to a significant extent, has arrived with the advent of modern scientific techniques. While the spiritual whispers of their beliefs about the afterlife remain tantalizingly elusive due to the loss of their language and unwritten traditions, the mummies themselves, those enduring physical forms, have begun to speak in a new way, under the careful, analytical gaze of 20th and 21st century science. You're now stepping out of the dusty antiquarian's cabinet and into the clean, well-lit laboratory, where science meets spirit, and the preserved remains of the Guanche people offer up astonishing insights into their lives, their health, their diet, and even the secrets of their unique mummification arts. For centuries, Guanche mummies were primarily objects of curiosity, marvel, or sometimes morbid fascination. But modern scientific methodologies have transformed them into invaluable bioarchaeological archives, direct windows into a lost pre-colonial Atlantic culture. Imagine one of these carefully preserved individuals. Perhaps one of the remarkably intact mummies from Tenerife or Gran Canaria, now undergoing a battery of non-invasive or minimally invasive examinations. Radiocarbon dating can now give us much more precise time frames for when these individuals lived and died, helping to piece together the chronology of Guanche society and their funerary practices across the different islands. Physical anthropology and osteology, the detailed study of their skeletal remains either through direct examination, if a mummy is less perfectly preserved, or through X-rays and CT scans for intact ones, can reveal a wealth of information. You can learn their approximate age at death, their sex, their stature. Scientists can identify signs of physical stress from hard labor, healed fractures, or evidence of interpersonal violence. The state of their teeth can tell us about diet and dental health, or perhaps the distinct lack of a decent Bronze Age dental plan. Significant wear on the molars. This individual clearly enjoyed their gofio, or perhaps spent a lot of time anxiously grinding their teeth about the next volcanic eruption. Paleopathology, the study of ancient diseases, offers further clues. By examining bone lesions, soft tissue if preserved, or even the traces left by ancient pathogens, researchers can identify some of the health challenges the Guanches faced. perhaps arthritis from a physically demanding lifestyle. Certain types of infections, though their isolation likely protected them from many Old World epidemic diseases until the Europeans arrived, or nutritional deficiencies. The interpretation of certain paleopathological findings in Guanche mummies, and whether they indicate widespread chronic conditions or more isolated cases, often involves careful statistical analysis and comparison with skeletal populations from similar pre-industrial societies. One of the most fascinating areas is dietary reconstruction through stable isotope analysis. By analyzing the ratios of stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen in bone collagen, scientists can get a remarkably detailed picture of what the Guanches ate. Did they rely more on terrestrial resources like their goats, sheep, pigs, and cultivated barley? Or did marine resources, fish, shellfish, seabirds, play a more significant role? The answer often varies by island and even by specific location within an island, showing how adaptable they were to diverse local environments. It's like a dietary detective story, written in the very chemistry of their bones. A mainstream historical fact, derived from such studies, is that the Guanche diet was generally quite reliant on gofio, the roasted barley or wheat flour, goat and sheep products, and supplemented by gathered plants and coastal resources. This diet, while perhaps monotonous at times, seems to have been reasonably well balanced for their environment, at least before the disruptions of conquest. And then there's the exciting field of ancient DNA-aDNA analysis. By extracting and sequencing DNA from Guanche mummies, researchers have been able to definitively confirm their North African Berber origins, tracing their genetic lineage back to the mainland. This provides a powerful scientific underpinning to the linguistic and archaeological evidence. aDNA can also reveal information about genetic diversity within and between island populations, patterns of migration, and even predispositions to certain genetic conditions. It's like finally getting to read the ancestral guest book of the Canary Islands. Modern imaging techniques like CT scans and X-rays have been a game changer for studying mummies non-invasively. You can now peer inside those carefully wrapped goatskin bundles without disturbing the precious remains. These scans can reveal the state of internal organs if preserved, the presence of any hidden amulets or objects tucked within the wrappings. A quirky tidbit is the occasional discovery of small, unexpected items this way, offering tiny new clues, details of bone structure, and evidence of specific mummification techniques like evisceration or the use of particular stuffing materials. This allows for a much more detailed understanding of the Mirlados art, confirming some of the accounts of early chroniclers and sometimes revealing new, previously unknown aspects of their craft. Aha! The CT scan shows a perfectly preserved goat cheese sandwich tucked under his armpit, clearly a vital provision for the afterlife, or perhaps just a forgotten lunch. So, while science cannot directly tell us the name of the god a Guanche individual prayed to, or the precise words of the chants sung at their funeral, it can paint an incredibly vivid picture of their physical lives, what they ate, the labors they endured, the diseases they suffered, how tall they stood, and how their bodies were so carefully prepared for whatever they believed came next. This scientific understanding doesn't diminish the spiritual mystery of the Guanches. In many ways, it enhances it, by bringing us closer to them as real human beings who lived, loved, suffered, and sought meaning in their unique island world. It allows their silent forms to whisper new kinds of tales written in their very bones and tissues, adding another layer to the enduring legacy of the Canary Islands' ancient inhabitants. This scientific understanding doesn't diminish the spiritual mystery of the Guanches. In many ways, it enhances it, by bringing us closer to them as real human beings who lived, loved, suffered, and sought meaning in their unique island world. It allows their silent forms to whisper new kinds of tales written in their very bones and tissues, adding another layer to the enduring legacy of the Canary Islands' ancient inhabitants. But beyond the careful measurements of calipers and the sterile hum of laboratory equipment, another kind of echo from these Guanche mummies and their sacred burial places has resonated through the centuries, the persistent, often chilling, whispers of local ghost lore and island legends. You are now stepping out of the lab and into the realm of folklore, exploring how these ancient remains and their evocative resting places have continued to haunt the popular imagination of the Canary Islands, even as Guanche culture was largely assimilated or suppressed following the Spanish conquest. The physical presence of their burial caves, often in remote and dramatic locations, could not be entirely erased. And where you have ancient tombs, especially those of a vanished people whose beliefs were poorly understood by their successors, you have fertile ground for ghost stories. The extent to which specific modern Canary Island ghost stories or folkloric traditions directly preserve authentic Guanche beliefs about the afterlife or spirits, versus being later reinterpretations or romanticized constructions influenced by European ghost lore and a general fascination with the exotic past, is a complex area of folkloric study, but the connection is often palpable. Imagine yourself as a goat herd or a farmer in the Canary Islands in the centuries after the conquest, say the 17th, 18th, or even 19th century. You live in a world now officially Christian, but the landscape around you is still dotted with these mysterious, ancient caves, places known to have once been the burial grounds of the antiguos, the old ones. Local knowledge, passed down perhaps through hushed family stories or community warnings, would mark these places as taboo, as potentially dangerous, as haunted. You wouldn't just casually explore a known Guanche burial cave looking for a cool spot to have your lunch. That would be like inviting a committee of very old, very leathery, and possibly very disgruntled spirits to share your sandwich. Probably best to dine elsewhere. The stories that arose would likely involve unexplained phenomena near these caves. You might hear tales of strange lights seen flickering at the entrance of a burial cave on a moonless night, or eerie sounds, moans, whispers, the faint clatter of what might be bone or pottery, drifting down from a high mountain ledge known to house Guanche mummies, natural cave acoustics, the wind whistling through crevices, the movement of small animals. All these could be easily reinterpreted by a fearful or superstitious mind as evidence of unquiet spirits. Did you hear that? Manuel sounded like old King Anyaturve's mummy complaining about the damp again. Or maybe it was just a very large, very asthmatic bat. Let's not find out. A mainstream historical fact is that the desecration of graves and the disturbance of the dead are almost universally considered taboo acts, often believed to bring misfortune or unleash vengeful spirits, given that many Guanche burial caves were indeed disturbed over the centuries. Whether by treasure hunters, though Guanche graves were rarely rich in conventional treasure, by individuals seeking mummies as curiosities, or even by natural erosion exposing remains. It's easy to see how stories of ghostly retribution would arise. If someone fell ill, or suffered a string of bad luck after meddling with a Guanche cave, the cause would seem obvious to the local community. The ancient spirits were angry. The mummies themselves, when accidentally encountered, would be a source of immense awe and fear. Imagine a shepherd, seeking shelter for his flock in a remote cave during a storm, stumbling upon these silent, skin-wrapped figures, their faces perhaps dimly visible in a flash of lightning. The shock, the terror, would be profound. Such an encounter would inevitably become a story, a legend, told and retold, growing with each iteration, solidifying the cave's reputation as a haunted, sacred, and deeply perilous place. A quirky tidbit from some Canary Island folklore involves tales of specific named spirits, or guardians, associated with certain caves or ravines, often places known to contain Guanche remains. These might not always be explicitly identified as Guanche ghosts in later Christianized folklore, but could be local nature spirits, demons, or even enchanted beings whose origins might subtly echo the pre-Hispanic reverence for these sites as homes of the ancestors. The landscape retains its memory, even if the names and the stories change. The physical appearance of the mummies, when seen, could also contribute to the lore. Their desiccated, often dark, leathery forms, their sometimes contorted postures due to post-mortem desiccation, or the way they were bound, could easily appear unsettling or even monstrous to those unfamiliar with the Guanche preservation techniques. It's not hard to see how they could become the monsters in local cautionary tales. The figures' parents warned their children about to keep them away from dangerous, remote caves. The very air of mystery surrounding Guanche beliefs about the afterlife would also fuel speculation. Since their precise theology was largely lost, later generations were free to project their own fears and fascinations onto these silent remains. Were they waiting for something? Were they trapped? Were they benevolent ancestors? Or something more sinister? The lack of clear answers only made the stories more potent. So, while the Shen priests no longer performed their intricate soul-guiding rites, and the specific Guanche understanding of the soul's journey faded from common knowledge, the mummies themselves, in their cave sanctuaries, continued to exert a powerful influence on the popular imagination. They became the silent protagonists of a new set of stories, a new layer of folklore laid down upon the ancient spiritual landscape. Their whispers were no longer the carefully prepared declarations for Persephone or Achaman, but the eerie moans and fleeting shadows of Canary Island ghost lore, a testament to the enduring human tendency to populate places of profound death and mystery with the echoes of the unseen. Their whispers were no longer the carefully prepared declarations for Persephone or Achaman, but the eerie moans and fleeting shadows of Canary Island ghost lore, a testament to the enduring human tendency to populate places of profound death and mystery with the echoes of the unseen. And as our own nocturnal exploration of these ancient islanders and their preserved dead draws to its final, quiet moments, you are left contemplating the profound, silent legacy of the Guanche mummies. Though their original voices were largely extinguished by conquest, and their specific beliefs often shrouded by the mists of time and the biases of early chroniclers, these enduring physical forms, resting in their eternal sleep, continue to speak to us in a unique and powerful way. They are poignant testaments to a lost people, a unique worldview, and the universal human engagement with the great mysteries of life and death. What is it about these silent, skin-wrapped figures from the Fortunate Isles that still holds our attention, that still prompts us to listen for their whispers across the centuries? Perhaps it's the sheer fact of their survival, their remarkable preservation against the odds, offering us a direct, tangible link to a culture that was so tragically disrupted and transformed. In a world where so much of the indigenous past has been irrevocably lost, each Guanche mummy is an invaluable, irreplaceable archive, a silent storyteller. It's like finding a perfectly preserved, handwritten letter from a distant ancestor you never knew you had. The script might be unfamiliar, the full context elusive, but the human connection, the sense of a life lived, is undeniably there. The ultimate legacy of the Guanche people and their mummification practices continues to be reassessed by scholars, moving beyond purely scientific or colonial interpretations towards a more holistic appreciation of their cultural significance and their poignant place in the broader narrative of human history and cultural encounters. What their mummies whisper to us today is a multifaceted story. They speak of indigenous ingenuity and adaptation, living for centuries in isolation on volcanic islands. The Guanches developed sophisticated techniques for preserving their dead using only the materials their environment provided: animal skins, local plants, resins, the dry air of their sacred caves. This wasn't borrowed knowledge from Egypt or elsewhere. It was their own unique solution to a universal human concern, a testament to their resourcefulness. They whisper of a deep spiritual life, a profound concern for the fate of the soul and the importance of a proper passage into the afterlife, the meticulous care taken in mummification, the placement in sacred, often inaccessible, burial caves, the inclusion of grave goods. All these point to a worldview where death was not an end, but a significant transition requiring ritual support and continued respect. Even if we can no longer decipher the precise details of their eschatological map, the care lavished on their dead speaks volumes about their belief in an enduring spiritual essence. They whisper, too, of ancestral connection. The likelihood that these mummies, especially those of revered leaders or elders, served as focal points for ancestor veneration suggests a powerful bond between the living and the dead, a belief in the continued influence and guidance of those who had gone before. These weren't just bodies, they were ancestors, guardians, links in an unbroken chain of lineage that connected the community to its origins and its sacred land. Don't forget us. Their silent forms seem to say, "We are the roots of your tree." And, of course, they whisper of tragedy and loss. The Guanche mummies are a poignant reminder of the devastating impact of colonial conquest on indigenous cultures worldwide. Their story is one of resilience in life, but also of profound disruption and cultural erasure in the face of overwhelming external forces. Many of their mummies were desecrated, destroyed, or removed from their sacred resting places, their original meanings often lost or willfully ignored. Their silent forms now also carry the weight of that historical injustice, a quiet testament to a world that was irrevocably changed. It's a sobering thought, a reminder that history isn't always a gentle progression. Sometimes it's a brutal collision. "We were here," they seem to whisper. "We had a world. Remember us." A mainstream historical fact is that today, Guanche mummies and artifacts are important cultural heritage for the Canary Islands, with many housed in museums like the Museo de la Naturaleza y Arqueología Muna in Tenerife. Ongoing scientific research, conducted with increasing respect and ethical consideration, continues to reveal more about their lives, their health, their diet, and their unique cultural practices, allowing these ancient islanders to speak to us in new ways. A quirky tidbit of modern times is how the image of the Guanche mummy, or Guanche culture in general, sometimes appears in contemporary Canarian art, music, or literature, often as a symbol of deep island identity, a connection to an ancient, mysterious past that predates Spanish rule. It's a way of acknowledging and reintegrating this foundational layer of Canarian heritage. So, as you imagine leaving those silent cave sanctuaries, stepping back out into the bright Canary Island sunlight, the whispers you carry with you are complex. They are whispers of a unique Stone Age culture thriving in isolation. They are whispers of a deep spiritual connection to a dramatic volcanic landscape. They are whispers of meticulous care for the dead, of belief in an afterlife, of veneration for ancestors, and they are also whispers of conquest, of loss, and of the enduring power of human remains to tell stories even when their original voices have fallen silent. The Guanche mummies, in their eternal sleep, remain powerful conduits to a lost world. They challenge our understanding, they evoke our empathy, and they remind us of the incredible diversity of human experience and belief. Their silent song is one of resilience, of mystery, and of a profound, ancient connection to those Isles of Fortune that once were entirely their own. And now, as the volcanic peaks of the Canary Islands fade into the mists of your sleepy imagination, and the silent forms of the Guanche mummies rest undisturbed in their ancient caves, let a sense of profound peace settle over you. The journey through their lost world, with its whispers of ancient rites and enduring spirits, is complete. The need to decipher their mysteries, to understand their sorrows, can now be gently released. Allow the warmth of the island sun, the vastness of the Atlantic, and the deep quiet of those sacred burial caves to transform into a comforting stillness within your own mind. There are no more tales of conquest or loss tonight, only the gentle rhythm of your breathing, a soft and steady anchor in the peaceful present. The Guanche people and their carefully preserved ancestors have shared what silent stories they can. Now, it is time for your own spirit to find its rest, to drift into a sleep as deep and untroubled as the centuries of repose that have held those ancient islanders. The whispers fade, the islands sleep, and a profound calm enfolds you.